Oubai Shahbandar, TRT World's Defence Analyst. 20th of January, it all began, setting off from the Turkish side of the border, now entering the centre of Afrin. Has it surprised you with, let's say, relative ease? Because, of course, Turkey has lost military fighters. The FSA has lost members to the fight against the YPG, but now they're in the centre of Afrin.
Well, now that the myth of invincibility of the YPG terror group has been stripped bare for the whole world to see, to bear witness, we can now look at what's next. First, you have to sustain these gains. You have to ensure that you have a holding force that can ensure that Afrin is safe from infiltration of terror groups, whether it's be by the YPG or by Daesh. And two, you have to really look at how can you ensure that the YPG no longer presents a threat to the Syrian people and to Turkey. Of course, we've seen cross-border attacks, and that's really what initially led to this operation nearly 50 days ago. You now have potentially an Afrin model that can be applied elsewhere in Syria, whereas the Turkish forces can create new realities on the ground in Arab villages and Arab cities and towns, working with its local allies in the Free Syrian Army to ensure that the YPG no longer presents a threat to the Syrian people and to regional security. And then, most importantly, we have to ask ourselves, why is this so important in terms of the broader context, in terms of why this operation matters, not only for Turkey and the Syrian people, but for the whole world. The YPG allowed Daesh freedom of movement in many parts of Syria. It controls strategic parts of Syria that you have to hold to ensure that Daesh is no longer able to reemerge. And of course, Daesh still has pockets in parts of Syria. It's still active. It is not completely eradicated yet. So you have to ensure that you're working with the local allies, with the Free Syrian Army, and with the local towns and villagers and tribal leaders, so that these terror groups no longer emerge from the ashes and are able to present a threat to the world. And that's what the YPG was allowing Daesh to do, and oppressing the local populace. So this operation is important not only from the local context, but from a global perspective as well.
Yes, but that was very much Turkey's aim there, Oubai. What is the reaction likely to be in Damascus from the regime? How does it regard the FSA, and how might it now react that the FSA is there? Is it not Turkey's eventual aim, obviously, to leave, but to allow the FSA to control that part of Syria? This is a foreign country.
Well, the Assad regime's reaction to Operation Olive Branch has been very telling. There's a long history of collaboration between the Assad regime and the PKK and the YPG that goes back to the time of Hafez al-Assad, the father of the current authoritarian leader in Damascus, and the fact that the Assad regime allowed the YPG to move weapons and personnel through Assad regime territory into Afrin to fight the Turkish forces in the Free Syrian Army. In fact, if you remember, there was a Assad regime official that early on in the beginning phases of the operation threatened to shoot down Turkish aircraft over Afrin airspace. Of course, that did not happen. So a lot of bravado and bluster, both from the Assad regime in Damascus and from the YPG leadership that threatened to turn Afrin into Turkey's next Vietnam. That, of course, did not happen. So now we can look at what's next. Now that Afrin has been more or less secured, what will the Turkish forces in the Free Syrian Army do next? The Free Syrian Army is saying that they've established a national army to provide security for the local populace. That's crucial in order to prevent another exodus of hundreds of thousands of civilians. Of course, we've seen that happening as the Assad regime has advanced in other parts of Syria due to the atrocities committed by those forces and by the YPG. So ensuring that the local people are able to go back to their homes is going to be absolutely crucial for the continued success of this operation.
When could we possibly see a moment when it might be safe for people to go back to Afrin? Again, the stated aim of Operation Olive Branch. What would make people sure that the YPG would not come back, that they could possibly go back to their own families, to their original homes? We saw the situation in Afrin is not nearly as bad as it is in some other Syrian cities, which are totally demolished.
Absolutely, and that's very telling in by itself. And I think the Euphrates Shield operation that happened last year, that took place last year in Jarablus and other parts of northern Aleppo, offered a model of success here, whereas those cities that are now controlled by the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian interim government, with the support of the Turkish army, are thriving, they're functioning. There are no airstrikes, there are no barrel bombs, there's no oppression by the Assad regime and by the YPG or Daesh. So that model can now be applied in the wider context in Afrin province and in Afrin city, where the local populace, both Arab and Kurd, can finally rise and take control of the affairs of their own state without fear of Daesh, the Assad regime, or the YPG PKK terror group.
Okay. Oubai Shahbandar, thank you very much.